Still Wakes the Deep is the latest walking sim from the Chinese Room, the developer who created the walking sim genre all the way back in 2012 with their source mod called Dear Esther. It's that same sense of poetry that Dear Esther had, which undergirds Still Wakes the Deep. But it's a lot more like slam poetry this time around.
Slam poetry, yelling, angry.
It's intense and immediate. It's a legit horror game, and is easily the best thing that the Chinese Room has ever made. So let's get stuck in like the game's flubber from hell monsters and figure out why. Now, contrary to my own popular belief, Still Wakes the Deep's unique Scottish oil rig setting is not the first time the studio has written a story around that area. Dear Esther took place on the Scottish archipelago of the Hebrides Islands. But whereas that game could have taken place on any island in the UK and most wouldn't know the difference, Still Wakes the Deep, or Still Wakes as we'll call it from here, is unmistakably Scottish. It's so full of thick brogue and colloquialisms that the subtitles actually have to translate these turns of phrases pretty regularly instead of just transcribing them, so that an American English audience could actually understand them.
The fucking bucket of you gobshites messing with my operation! Do you understand me?
This is great because most Scottish media are period pieces like Braveheart or Outlander, or they suppress the accent of the Scots they use like David Tennant in Doctor Who.
Okay. New teeth. That's weird.
Although that show does get credit for finally allowing Peter Capaldi to use his.
Oh, it's good. I'm Scottish. I'm Scottish. I am Scottish. I can complain about things.
Still Wake's sense of authenticity sets the game apart from the get-go, and especially so for someone who's always loved this accent and this culture, as my own heritage traces back to Sir James Douglas, who carried his best friend Robert the Bruce's heart back to the Holy Land after his death. The voice acting in general is a bit overacted at times, with more blasphemy than I'm pretty sure Scottish working men use in real life.
Are you sure about that?
Jesus fucking Christ!
Christ almighty. Merry fucking Christmas.
Mr. McCleary, you can fuss and cuss all you like.
But it's earnest and heartfelt and reminds me very favorably of the excellent voice work in Dear Esther. And while it's a great change of pace that you're actually with another culture other than, generic American,
Aye.
what really feels special is the actual physical setting, the oil rig off the coast of Scotland. The cover art for the game alone is just gloriously mood-inducing, and let's be honest, the very idea of an oil rig is doing the heavy lifting. It's utterly right for a horror game, and it's surprising that this setting doesn't come up more often. The isolation, the sheer danger of just being this sort of filling in the middle of an ocean cavity, hoping not to get swept away by the waves. There's just inherent danger and intrigue to me personally, but that's also because I'm afraid of the ocean, so maybe that's why. Now, the reason that we're even here is because electrician Kaz McCleary, a husband and father of 2 girls, is getting the heck out of Dodge after very badly beating up a man who was talking badly about his wife. His inability to face the music and live up to the consequences of his actions is starting to tear at his marriage, and his wife warns him that while she loves him deeply, no pun intended, he's got to make this right or it's over between them. Soon, Kaz is forced into action after his rig drills a bit too deep and awakes something very malicious beneath the sea that starts taking over the facility and its inhabitants, coating the rig in darkly beautiful, color out of space inspired biomatter that deforms the workers here into monsters if it doesn't outright consume them. Now, many will immediately jump to the influence of Lovecraft here, and let's be honest, I titled this video initially something along the lines of Still Wakes the Deep puts the craft in Lovecraftian, and I just did a color out of space reference, and the game is about everyday people trying to come to terms with epic implacable evil, so it makes sense that we'd go there. There is a lot of the master of horror here, where we see the effects of this great evil beneath the sea, but are never really given any indication of exactly why or how it is there, only that it's clearly not a good influence on anybody here. And this lack of recognizable motivation, even on a biological instinctual level, makes the invasion of the rig feel all that more dehumanizing and vile, a la classic cosmic horror. But what really locks me into this game world is the authenticity of the environments, the sound design, and the often undersung heroes that are the animations and analog feedback on the Xbox controller that I played with. Being that the game takes place on what is a very real type of facility that needs to look like it functions properly to be believable, the Chinese Room needed to nail the look of the rig or it'd come off as a gimmick. I can safely say that this is one of the best feeling game worlds that I've been in, period. At least when you're above deck. Inside the ship, where you're cranking open doors and having to run down hallways, isn't terribly interesting visually, but holy crap, go onto the top deck and see the mist rising from the sea, hear the wails of the monsters in the distance, and watch the fire rise from destroyed fuselage, and it's like being inside of one of those early aughts disaster movies. Raindrops running down the windows while inside the walkways is also really well done. Couple that with how much of the rig you get to see and fix as Kaz calls his various co-workers to figure out the best way to salvage the rig, and you very gradually start to feel like this place makes more sense. All these phone calls he makes are kind of inadvertently hilarious, as every single one of them is like a new guy. Like, how does Kaz know and remember 20 to 30 guys? But also, all these guys seem to have the same voice actors, so they all kind of run together. It's just funny that every time he picks up the phone, it's like, "Ah, it's you, Brody. Ah, no, it's you there. Ah, no, it's you, other guy."
Aye.
But jokes aside, other reviewers have pointed out that it's actually quite refreshing to see a protagonist who, when he calls these various characters throughout the ship, actually argues with them as his mission givers instead of just blindly accepting whatever instruction they give him like most video game protagonists do. Now this becomes a bit repetitive because he's always so full of piss and vinegar about everything. You know, you could tell the guy good morning and he'd be like, "But is it though?" But the intention was sound from a design perspective. I also like the fact that you have a female coworker on the rig named Finley. I mean, sure, she looks like a cocktail waitress on an oil rig.
Oh my god. She looks like a cocktail waitress on an oil rig or something. Look at the piping. Look at the piping.
But jokes I've wanted to make forever aside, she genuinely looks like she could handle herself and is the kind of hardy broad that would do just fine in a male-dominated industry like this. But back to those interactions with coworkers about how to fix the ship. As is Chinese room custom, a lot of the game is simply walking to and from your objectives, but there's a much greater emphasis on interacting with your environments than in any other previous games, even if most of it is technically quick time events or simple set pieces. You'll have to hold the interact button to climb up things and steady yourself when the rig is rocked by explosions or the thing from the deep pulsating, and you'll open quite a few hatches, spin lots of valves to release pressure, or flip switches, all that kind of stuff. It's really just business to engage you and doesn't require much brain power, but it's there to help the ship feel more like a real place that needs your attention and input to function. And my god, is there a comical amount of yellow paint and yellow paint variants in this already incredibly linear game. Now, obviously some of that makes sense because apparently oil rigs are colored this way for safety reasons, so you can see this stuff at night, but it's kind of blatant here. And like I said in my bolt gun review, yellow paint isn't offensive to me, but it's so often used to point you towards what is already obviously the direction you'd want to go in, and it can be kind of distracting to have the game over tell you what you're probably going to intuit anyway from just how the game looks and the fact that there's only so many options, how to get out of a room or what thing can be crawled under. It makes the game feel like it doesn't trust its own art design and makes the world feel especially contrived as a result. But the real joy of interacting with the world isn't the complexity of anything you do, but the tactile feedback you get from doing anything. Do yourself a favor and play this with an Xbox controller. The most mundane actions feel so realistic and more important than they are because they're so fully realized. Jumping across chasms and feeling the impact through the controller of my own feet landing, and then requiring me to hammer buttons to keep from slipping off and then pull myself back up, is just one example of how much craft was put into this Lovecraftian game. The sound, the film grain, realistic look of everything, and the animations all work together wonderfully to help you inhabit Kaz and his world. So that's all the basics of the game's design. But let's get into the whole reason that many of us are here, that damned thing beneath the ocean that terrorizes us the whole way through. When you're not doing busy work to keep the rig from falling under the sea or blowing up, you're witnessing the mutated remains of the men you once called friends and co-workers, or you're being chased by the last vestiges of their humanity in monstrous form. Numerous scenes of viscera that seem to isolate their faces are extra haunting. Don't get me started on how horrifying it is to be chased by the giant mutated head of a man you once knew. It's like MODOK if it wasn't funny. Here's just one of many absolutely unhinged chase scenes in the game. Everything from the monster design to how lively it moves, and how deftly the sound design accounts for how close the thing always feels to grabbing you, and how the voice acting just rumbles through the walls of your skull is just so scary. It's like Outlast if it was put through a Christopher Nolan theater experience filter. The game even gives you some classic hide-and-seek stealth sections where you crouch underneath objects and let the monster pass or throw objects to distract it. But the encounters with these beasts are not only gut-wrenching because you can tell that some part of your coworker's consciousness is still in there, but because each encounter has just enough looseness to its design in terms of how the AI will react to your movements that it feels more dangerous than it likely is. The patrol patterns of the monsters aren't super logical, they're just kind of feral and instinctual, and it's never super obvious that you throwing things is actually distracting the monster straight to where you threw it, or if it knows that you're trying to fool it. The fact that I can't tell whether the game is really breathtakingly easy and not really putting me in much danger, and that my narrow escapes aren't all that narrow, just makes the whole thing that much more unnerving and harrowing. More than a few times I would run out from cover, alert the monster and crouch down, actively sitting forward in my chair and sucking in my gut to lean forward as much as possible, as if to keep myself as far away from the monster at my back as I could. There's such an immersion factor to this game with all the production elements working together in a believable relationship. So yeah, Still Wakes the Deep comes out ahead of all the other Chinese room projects because its setting is incredibly unique, beautifully realized, utterly terrifying at times, and even a bit heartfelt and emotional and culturally authentic when it wants to be. I was often captivated by the simplest things because they felt so real to do and to just be inside of as an experience. That made the invading horror of the monsters all the more frightening because they didn't just feel like obviously disgusting, get away from me things, but true physical threats in my actual factual living space. I do want to spend just a bit of time on the story though, spoiler free, before we conclude. The Chinese Room is known for their narrative focus above all else. I've often called Dear Esther the poem you can play. It's full of flowery imagery and abstract musings, and it's basically just walking across an island to a voiceover, like if you turned on some music while you exercised. The studio's Amnesia sequel, called A Machine for Pigs, or Amnesia as it's affectionately called, was all about its story too, though it didn't do much for me as it had an incredibly obvious twist. But Still Wakes the Deep really feels like a level up moment for the studio. It's the most cinematic of all of its games to date, and it doesn't feel overdone anywhere except perhaps the voice acting at times. The cinematography is never showy or over-directed either. The strength of the art design carries the picture, and there's not an excessive amount of Dutch angles or annoying falling over and getting back up or blacking out in first person that so many games like this tend to waste your time with. As for the narrative itself, I generally think the arc is pretty decent. Classic even. It's about a man running from his problems at home to an isolated oil rig and being thrust into an even more dire situation that asks him to put his life on the line for others. There's one particularly touching scene late in the game where Kaz shows us a truly emotional side of himself that's not just frenzy or raw emotion, but raw sorrow. It's a great way to let us know that he's capable of deep feeling that isn't just bluster and bravado as he can tend to be full of. That said, too often the emotionality here is preached to the player, but never really proven. As the flashbacks wear on, Kaz and his wife Suze hash out their differences and end up telling each other that they still love each other, and family friend Roy, who works with Kaz on the ship, likes to remind Kaz that despite it all, Suze loves Kaz deeply. Now that's fine and all, it's sweet, but I don't understand what the actual conflict in their personalities is and their marriage, besides the fact that he went overboard once in defending her honor, and that's why he's now in trouble. Kaz seems to be well liked by everyone but his boss Rennick and Adair, both of whom seem like assholes anyway. I don't ever get the impression that Kaz is anything but a mostly likable guy with little to conflict people about liking him. So when he's a pain in the ass to his wife, and we're given the impression that this event is the last straw, I don't buy it very much except to move the story along in my own head and to try to make the experience more fulfilling and full of closure for myself. By the end of it all, the game just felt like it needed a little bit bigger climax. Sure, it resolves the thread thematically, but it doesn't reveal a whole lot about humanity except in very broad, kind of archetypal terms. I get the impression that the writing team thought the ending was more about a character moment, a quiet shift within Kaz to become better than he was, and that's fine. That's good writing theoretically. But the game drifts back into sentimentality and telling us that everyone loves each other, that they're all important and all this, a few too many times. It feels kind of bolted on. I needed more backstory on Kaz and why he is and what he's done. Maybe even something like he's overcompensating for guilt about what he's done before to his wife. Maybe he didn't do something soap opera like he cheated, but maybe he emotionally cheated with somebody, or maybe he's a little bit abusive or something like that and thinks he can overcompensate by beating some other guy up that's talking badly about her to win back her favor. ever, kind of a Will Smith situation. I also would have liked more of a send-off for the thing beneath the waves, the monster or the presence or whatever that's overtaking the rig, as it starts to feel a little bit too much like a metaphorical catalyst for Kaz growing as a person than an independent entity that's actually out to kill us. Now, some of these critiques are entirely preferential, I'll give you that, but I do think there's a lack of specificity that hurts what is otherwise a pretty good setup and keeps it from being truly memorable for me. Unlike, say, Dear Esther, where the poetry and the abstractness of it all had enough inhabitable detail for me to latch onto it and start to see something of myself in this experience. Now don't worry, I still teared up from time to time and certainly by the end, but I couldn't help but feel like there was a lot of opportunity for specificity instead of this sort of one-size-fits-all sentimentality.
You're a good lad, Kaz. That's why Suze loves you. She does, you know. She really loves you.
The good news, though, is that's really the worst thing you could say about Still Wakes the Deep, and it's hardly even that bad. It's just sort of a preferential, like, I wish there was a little bit more here. The game is just well realized. Nothing it's doing is ostensibly original, but the details are so solid, down to the look and feel and the concept. The Chinese Room has orchestrated yet another soulful tale of coming to grips with loss and sacrifice, and it's their best one yet because it's actually a pretty decent thing to play as well as to listen to and to feel. The game's got some of the scariest chase scenes I've ever played, and some of the best production values you're likely to come across. And now that I've seen what they can do with cinematography and voice acting and motion capture, I'm a lot more excited to see them at the helm of the Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2 game that's coming out later this year, supposedly. Give these guys and gals their flowers and check out Still Wakes the Deep. It's on Game Pass right now. It's about 4 to 5 hours, and it's just a good time. Make sure you use that Xbox controller for that immersive rumble, too. The Chinese Room has really put the love of craft in Lovecraftian, and we're the better for it.
That's cool, you numpty.
Thanks for watching. And a huge shout out to those of you generous enough to support my work by becoming a patron. I'd like to thank Mark Neubauer, Deadforge, Hey Blondie, Hiakshow, M, Bibby Effin Bloxburg, and Melancholy Geek. And a very special thanks to James Wyatt, The Nth Review, and Hot Hamlet for subscribing to my Patreon's highest tier. If you'd like to be a part of the reason this channel gets bigger and better, feel free to head on over to patreon.com/high-functioning-medium, or you can become a YouTube channel member. Also check out my GOG and NordVPN affiliate links to support the channel through no cost to you. God bless you everyone, and I'll see you soon.